For anyone on our Cosmo webinar that I don't know, my name is Ruth Ann Rugg. I work for the Texas Association of Museums part-time, but my true love is to work for the Coalition of State Museum Associations, COSMA, which I also do part-time. And I am really happy that we have started this every other month webinar so that we can talk to each other and learn from one another. Our speaker today is someone who recently joined our board and got on the program committee. And well, as soon as you do that, man, we got you. So we signed her up for a webinar right away. Can you all see Lisa? Lisa Craig Brisson, wave at everybody. There she is. I told her not to clean her office because, you know, all of our offices look like that. I'm not in my office. I am in a lovely hotel room in steamy Houston where we're doing a project. So anyway, I told Lisa that I would give her just a couple of minutes at the beginning to introduce herself and tell us a little something about herself. And before I do that, though, I'm looking over here at the control panel. I'm going to assume that you guys know how this stuff works. And you can ask a question in the question bar. You can ask a question, I think, in the chat bar, but really the question bar is easier for me. And it's all about what's easier for me. And you do have something in your handout section, which is a copy of the PowerPoint that Lisa's going to go through. And then at the end, we have saved enough time that we can talk through some of the things that we're going to learn in the next few minutes. So with no further introduction, I want you all to say hello to Lisa Craig Brisson. And Lisa, tell us a little about yourself.
Hi, everybody. My name is Lisa Craig Brisson, as Ruth Ann said. And she just told me 5 seconds ago I have to tell about myself, so I'll try and be succinct. But I'm originally from Minnesota. I grew up in St. Paul, Minnesota. My first museum job was as a volunteer at age 11 at the Science Museum of Minnesota. And then when I was in college, I started working for the Minnesota Historical Society, and I worked at a couple historic sites there. Then I went off to graduate school and got a master's in museum studies, and then went back and worked for the Historical Society for a little while until I got a real job. And my first real job was here in Michigan. I worked for Mackinac State Historic Parks, and I worked there for about 5 years. And then I worked freelance for about 10 years. And then I started becoming more involved with the Michigan Museums Association. I got on their board of directors in about 2010, and then I was hired as executive director in 2012. If you know Michigan, we have two peninsulas. One is the Upper Peninsula. We call those people the Upers. And then the other part that most people are familiar with is the Lower Peninsula. So I'm going to use my hand to show you where I am. So I live in Sheboygan, Michigan, which is at the almost to the tip of the Lower Peninsula. This is where the Mackinac Bridge is, and then the Upper Peninsula, I can't do this in the screen, is up here. So I'm almost a Uper, but not quite. My husband's a Uper. And then in the summer, actually in 2 days, I will move to Mackinac Island, which is a small island in Lake Huron and the Straits of Mackinac. So up here, where my husband works for the Mackinac Island State Park Commission still. And so I'll move to the summer for a couple months because he has to work all the time. So they make him live there. And I join him once school is out. So that's a little bit about me.
Cool. Okay. Well, with no further ado, I don't want to waste any time. I want to get to this topic of how to use project management for other kinds of organizing, especially with your board. So I'm going to turn my webcam off. Do you want me to turn yours off, Lisa? So we're only looking at your screen?
I was wondering if we could have everybody introduce themselves first. So is there a way to open it up?
Well, I tell you what, let me go through and unmute everyone. There we go. Now you guys are unmuted. And you know what? We're going to start with Molly because Molly has been waiting the longest. Molly Conley, introduce yourself.
She's on.
Or it might not work. I don't know. They may not have the microphone.
All right. Well, I was mostly just curious for everyone what the State Museum Association are from, so I can figure that out later.
Okay. We'll
All right,
try it. We'll try it. Yeah, you know what we could do is we could have everyone write it into the questions.
Yeah, that would be good. Actually, I can't see the question, so write it into the chat, and then I can see it.
Okay.
That would be great.
Everybody's getting muted again.
Okay. So I want to know your name and your museum association and what community you're in right now. And I bet you can't use your hand to show me where you are. So. Ruth Ann, can you see answers? All right.
No, not yet.
Okay. So here's.
Yeah, you know what? We may have to do that at the end, Lisa. Sorry.
Right. We'll just keep going. So we don't have to look at me while I'm talking, right?
Okay, I'm going to turn you off.
Okay, thanks. All right. So I'm very happy to be doing this webinar today, but I'm not going to lie, I'm a little nervous because I've never done a webinar. I've never led a webinar before. I've only participated. And I'm not going to lie, I'm usually doing 6 of those things at the same time, so I haven't really paid attention. So thank you in advance for forgiveness for my nervousness and my newness at this. But hopefully we'll all enjoy the journey together. So speaking of a journey, that's my opening slide, as I hope you all can see. Because I wanted to spend a minute before I got started talking a little bit about my relationship with my board of directors. The Michigan Museums Association has a board of between 10 and 15 people. And they are a typical board, as you all have your own, I'm sure. I was a member of the board of directors before I became staff. So that was kind of a quirky transition for me when I was hired on. I did resign during the application process, just to be clear. And I will say that when I started, it was really, we were just coming out of a major crisis of every kind. So we had no money. We had had an executive director who was not a strong director. We had a board president who was a very, really made all the decisions. So kind of a weak board, and we really weren't really sure what we were doing at all. So I have spent a lot of time thinking about my board and developing my relationship with my board. So we did some strategic planning a few years ago, and I wanted us all to be on the same page. So I used an analogy for them about the relationship that the ED or that I had with them as board members and how I viewed it. And it was received very well. So I use it all the time. So this is how I explain my relationship with my board. So the Michigan Museums Association is on a journey. We're sort of on a road trip, right? So everybody has an important role to play on that road trip. The board of directors, primarily, one of the things they do is they choose the destination. So they say to the Michigan Museums Association, we are headed to the mystery spot in St. Ignace, which is featured in National Lampoon's Summer Vacation, FYI. But anyway, so we're all headed to the mystery spot. They have determined that. And of course, they determine that through strategic planning and through direction all the time. So that's their job, is to pick the destination. And then they're also, their job is also to set the route. And so they say, okay, we're going to the mystery spot. And they can decide, should we take, let's say we're going from Detroit, which is downstate, we're going to take freeways the whole way, or we're going to kind of wander and we're going to take the back roads. And so they kind of decide what is the plan for how we're going to get from A to B. And in particular, they sort of decide ahead of time, are we going to make a straight shot, or are we going to stop and look at all the historical markers on the way? So that's one example that I use to talk about sort of the focus that they want us to have in our journey. And then last thing that I view that as doing is determining the car, right? So they decide is MMA going to drive, well, a bike? So we're obviously not going very quickly, or a jalopy, or a convertible, or a Cadillac, or what is the vehicle that we're going to have that's going to take us from A to B? And then once we talked about that, you know, and I sort of talked about their role in planning and how they lead the organization, then I said, and then I view my role as the driver, right? So I'm driving the car, that they have decided what the car is, they've decided the destination, and they've generally decided the route. But of course, as we all know, the driver of the car has a lot of other decisions that they have to make. You don't just get in the car and just set the GPS and it goes. So there's a lot of smaller decisions that I have to make along the way. So once we established that relationship, we were pretty happy. But if you think about it, you know, road trips sometimes can be kind of tricky. And I thought that this cartoon perfectly described the road trip that I jumped on when I became executive director of the Michigan Museums Association. So I was driving the car. To be honest, it was a pretty crappy car. It couldn't go very fast. And so I'd say to them, like, I have to always stay in the right lane because I never know if it's going to break down on the side of the road. We didn't have a destination that we'd chosen. We didn't have a route. So I would be driving along a freeway, and there'd be a road sign, and someone would say, oh, let's go at that road sign. So then I'd start to go over in the lane to get to that road sign, and then someone would yell, no, let's go up the road a little bit more. So I always kind of felt insecure because I wasn't really sure where I was getting off, or was I staying on the freeway, or what was happening. And also it's stressful when people are screaming at you from the back seat of the car. I was very frustrated. And then of course I had the board members who really did nothing and just took a little nap. So that was our relationship. That was our road trip when I started as ED. And I did the best I could for about a year. And finally I said, you know, we're not really going anywhere here. We're in this car that barely can drive. We're always in the right lane because we don't have a lot of gas, and we don't know when we're getting off. And I feel like we could do better than this. And so one of the first, and the board agreed. So one of the first things they decided was that they would fire themselves from running the organization. So previous to this, the board was a working board, and we had committee structure. So we had a programs committee, and the committee was made up of members or whoever, and then it was led by a board member, the vice president for programs, and they would really oversee the conference planning and the workshop planning and any professional development things that we did. But the problem was that all of that function relied on that vice president for programs. So if it was someone who had a lot of time and was very thorough and detail oriented, then the conference was well. We had a robust workshop schedule. But if it was someone who I think is more typical of a State Museum Association board member, someone who's very busy that could only mentally weigh in occasionally, that was also reflected in a loosey-goosey conference plan or not a robust workshops. And because I'm who I am, I found myself more and more picking up the slack of those who were supposed to be in charge but weren't, and it was problematic. I would send them volunteers, and then we had other committees and they would never meet, and that was frustrating for the member. So finally I just said, I just feel like maybe this isn't the way to go for us, that maybe there's a better way than having you as a working board, even though I was half time at the time, or I might have even been like close to quarter time, but it was pretty few hours. So the board fired themselves, and we said, let's find another way to run this organization. And at the time, I happened to attend a workshop held by the American Association for State and Local History on project management. And I thought that I would go to this workshop and learn how to do like a Gantt chart or, some really good tools on project management. But in fact, it really was a whole different way of thinking. And it's, for those of you that don't know, project management is heavily utilized in the corporate world, in the business world, to move products and design new things. And it's a very elaborate and well-established field of study and work. And ASLH had looked at this corporate version of project management and applied it to history professionals. And specifically, they were talking about exhibits. And so I was really excited to figure out, oh, here's a way to plan conferences and do planning and plan my work. That's going to be really organized for me. So I really took the workshop just for my own benefit. But I kind of fell in love. And then I thought, well, let's try it. Let's try to use it for conference planning here at MMA. And so the slide now is sort of shows kind of the idea of project management. One of the biggest concepts that was really hard for me to figure out was you take a big project and you break it down into chunks of like activities. And so I don't know how to make it, but so it might be everybody that has anything to do with the tires would be, in a circle, and then everybody that had to do with the paint would be in another. And you just break it down into different chunks, things that you're dealing with all together, and then they provide deliverables. And as the project manager, you're not doing the work of circles. You're just keeping everybody on track, and you're providing vision, and you're trying to help each other understand what needs to happen. And so I really like that. It's kind of this idea of being almost like the person juggling all the balls. So I really took to project management like a duck to water, and really liked it. And we started by applying it to a conference in 2015. And we broke the conference down into different teams, as you can see. And then we worked our way through the project management process. And it really did help me on my end to be able to do my job in a good way. But along the way, I realized that something beautiful was happening with my board as well. And what it was doing was providing a structure for them, a structure for me, and a structure for our relationship, but especially a structure for what we were trying to do. And that it changed my relationship with the board so much better. And really, it was like magic. So I actually have talked about project management to museums in Michigan. I did this presentation at the Midwest conference last summer, but I really think that the best audience for this are us, our EDs, and especially EDs of like museum associations, this kind of a group. It just works so well. So that's why I love project management. It really helps me do my job and think through what we're trying to do as an association, but also the way that it uses the board has just solved so many problems for me. And that's what I'm going to talk about. I'm going to break down project management a little bit and then talk about my board a little bit, and then break it down some more. So this is a general map of project management. And I should say that I learned project management from ASLH, who had changed sort of that corporate project management to apply it to history people. And then I changed it to apply it to my people, or to me. So if you are someone who's trained in project management, some of this should look, I hope most of it looks familiar, but just know that I've tweaked it for my own purposes. So there's 4 major phases to project management, and then I added an additional one. So to me, the initial phase is visioning, and this is where things are ideas. It's not nobody's committing to anything, nothing's really happening, but you're just thinking about something. You have an idea, you're kind of looking at resources, you're kind of thinking about the needs, but it's not even really articulated. And then as part of project management officially, there's 4 additional stages. One is the defining stage, and that's where you decide what you're going to do. You figure it out. And then the next stage is the planning stage, where you figure out how you're going to do it. Then the execution, so then you do it, and then evaluation. So you look at what you did and decide if you did it well. So this isn't rocket science. I'm sure that this makes perfect sense to you to break something down in this way. What was beautiful about it was how I involved the board and when the board is involved. So here's a little chart. It's a little crude, but you get the idea of it. So there's 3 groups of people that are involved with project management. For me, one is the board, and they're red. One is me, and I'm blue, and then one is our members. Because at MMA now we use members for volunteers to do almost everything because we're such a small organization. So yeah, we tell them it's a membership benefit that they get to do the work for us. It's awesome. I call it leadership experience, and it's great. So you should try it sometime. But anyway, back to project management. So as you can see, the board is involved in different stages in different ways. So in the visioning and the defining stage, they are heavily involved, and they love it because they can really think about a project. They can decide, they can, have a lot of conversations about things and really think through things and bring up problems and bring up solutions, and they go talk in circles and have a lot of cool discussions, and some of them that really don't go anywhere. But I don't care because I don't have to do anything yet. I'm just listening and offering my suggestions. And then in the planning stage, once they've defined the project, then there's a commitment, and I have them, they actually do a motion to the board and vote on it to the full board, and they approve a project, and I'll show you more about that in a minute. But once they've approved it, once it's official and legally binding, then we plan it. And at that point, I have one person from the board that I work with. We call them the proxy. And so the proxy and I plan the project, which frankly, to be honest, I've already planned in my head while they were defining it. But I do take a minute to plan it and talk through the plan with the proxy. So you can see at that point, we shifted from the board being highly involved to me being the one that's sort of really highly involved. The board is still involved in some way. And then usually I bring in some members and they help with the planning process as well. Then we execute it, so we make it happen. So again, I'm pretty heavily involved with that. Our members are very involved. The board is not very involved at all. And that's a very important thing to me. One of the issues that we have, which I'm guessing you might have, is that even though the board was fired from running the organization, the members of the board are still members of the organization, and they still want to volunteer. And not only are they members, but they're fabulous members, and they have great connections, and they're wise, and they're wonderful. So we want them to be involved, but I want them to be involved as volunteers, not as board members. And that's really hard for everybody to be able to say, when am I a board member? When am I not a board member? And so this clearly shows that they're not board members. Like if there's a board member heavily involved in a project at the execution stage, they're a volunteer, and they know they're a volunteer because I remind them of that in the nicest way possible. But we have set up processes, so if they want to be a board member, there's a way for them to step back and put that board member hat back on, but it's not during a meeting that I'm running, and that's really important. So in the execution stage, the board has a really diminished role, but then the project is over and we get to the evaluation stage, and they're back right up there at the top, and they give a lot of feedback. If it's something they care about deeply, they give a lot of feedback. If it's something that just they're happy it was done, then it's not a lot of feedback, but there's a step and there's a part of the process for them to be involved there. And then as you can see, I'm involved, and of course the members are involved in the evaluation as well, but not to the same extent. And it's this little map, I think, that does it for everybody. And even my board members, when I show them this map, they're like, oh, I get it. I'm not supposed to, when I'm a session presenter, I'm not a board member, I'm a session presenter. So this is the magic part, right? Where we've decided when the board is involved and how they're involved and when they're not involved. And it's a beautiful thing. So I am going to go to the next slide. I just want you to know, like, if you're typing questions, I'm not seeing any of them, but feel free to type questions in or comments in as we're going along, and then we'll figure out how to get questions at the end as well. Okay, so now I'm going to talk about the specific stages of each of the parts of project management. And so again, and you've seen all these before now. So the first stage is visioning, and where we're just kind of mulling ideas and talking about resources and thinking about needs. And for example, one of the things that we're talking about doing at MMA is we really want to facilitate some paid internships. So what we'd like to do is find somebody that'll give us a pot of money that we can then distribute to museums and interns, so that interns can work in museums and have concrete paid experience, and it's going to solve a lot of problems. So, but we don't have the money, we don't have any staff for that, we don't have the ability to do it. So we're just going to think about it for a long time, and everybody's going to pay attention to the world around them and see if there's models and resources, and think about what we need, but nobody's making decisions, and none of it matters because we haven't committed to doing it yet. So it's just a beautiful, it's kind of like the happy time when you're, it's like imagination time. And you can see in that time, the board of directors, I've kind of, in the little bubbles, I've heightened, made it, darker, who's the most important person or who's most involved. So the board is really, really heavily involved in that. But of course, I am who I am, so I'm always involved in everything. But I try to always let the board kind of be in charge at this point. Okay, then we get to the defining section, and this is the time when all the hard work happens for the board. And I spend, sometimes this stage is like a half of a board meeting. It's pretty quick. And sometimes the stage is 3 or 4 board meetings. I find that if we can't settle enough to define the project, it's not a good project for us to quite do. We're not quite ready for it. So I don't really push through this stage because I feel like it's going to take the time that it needs to take. And it's just going to be a headache for me if I try to push it through because I want to get it done. So there's different aspects of this that we have to all decide together. And just to show you the, to me, it's like a little funnel, right? Like we take all the ideas from before and we kind of funnel them into this cohesive project. And again, it's led by the board. It's supposed to be led by the board. Sometimes we have board members that are really on fire about it and they really do lead the fray. But sometimes I'm the one that's leading them, but I lead one board member to help kind of corral everybody else. So I want to just see if I can do this. I'm going to pull up an actual project. So what I do is we have a template for this, and this is when we're defining a project. This is what we're defining. This is how we're doing it. So this is a project that we approved a year ago that is still not even halfway done, but it will be done eventually. But this is a project that we talked about for years. We were in the sort of the idea stage for a long time, and then we were in the defining stage for, I think, 3 board meetings, which is 6 months, because they just couldn't settle on what they wanted. But basically, it's called the Michigan Museum Census. And in real world project management, the people who are the ones that are deciding the project, who are either providing the money or the authority, whatever, they're called the sponsors. And so the sponsors of the project are the board. They're the ones that decided. And then one of the things I don't want on my road trip is like 15 people yelling at me all at once. And so we have one board member that I work with, and we call them a proxy. And that I made that up as a term because they're one that I could find in the formal project management system. But I have somebody proxies. So that means that when there's anything I need to discuss with the board about a project, I go to that one proxy. And then also if there's other board members who say are a volunteer on a project and they're starting to have board member-y kind of concerns, then they go to that proxy. They don't come to me. They do. I say, that's great. That's an excellent thing to bring up to the proxy, and they can either address it or bring it to the board. So this each project has a proxy, and sometimes the proxies are the ones that develop the project, and sometimes it's me and the proxy signs off on it. I don't really care, but I always have to have a board member. That I'm always the project manager. I will tell you, we've tried to have other people project manage, but it's still a relatively new enough thing that there's no board members that feel like they can't be a project manager anyway. And then I just have a second staff person now. She has not been on the job long enough to be the project manager, but I see her doing it at some point. And then the date of board approval. Okay, each project has a project description. So this is the quick summary. This is not even the elevator speech. This is a walking down the street and passing someone speech. So for this project, it's a comprehensive list of museums, and it's a first stage in a bigger process. And then we do the summary, and that is it's the context. So why are we doing it? What is driving us to do this? Who cares? What do we care about? So we just give a little bit of background information about why we're doing this. And I love this part of a project because it allows me to find everybody what we've done before and why we're doing it, and sort of to document that as well. And then the other thing that's nice about it is when we get new people, so new board members or new people on the project, I can give this to them and they already are up to speed and they understand that there's context. Then we have the project objectives, and those objectives are broken down into different categories. So we always have the primary objective, and there's just one of those. And if it all boils down to one thing, what is the one thing that we're trying to do? And sometimes I'll have board members who want to list other things, and I say, no, we need one thing. And what is the one thing we're trying to do? So that in this project that we want a reliable count, we just want a number. But then, of course, there's other things that we want to do. So we always have secondary objectives. So these are other things we'll do. We'll confirm contact and basic information, and we'll put this in a spreadsheet somehow. So we always know we're going to do other things. But then here's what's nice is if I'm having a conversation with a board member and they suddenly want to obsess about the Excel spreadsheet, I can go back to them and say, oh, right, that's really important. But more important is that we get this count done. So that's the priority. So this gives me something concrete, everybody's approved, that I can go back when someone's trying to redirect a project midstream. I can go back to them and say, well, this is what we agreed on. And then if you would like to make a change in this, you should bring it up to the proxy, because that's a great person to talk to about that. If you want us to focus more on developing an Excel spreadsheet than getting a count. And then there's other stuff that we want, but we don't really care as much about it. And we're not going to change the path for it. But so we have our state funder is the one that keeps asking how many museums are in Michigan. So we know that by doing this project, I'll be able to answer a question that they ask me once a year, and I'll be happy to be able to do that. And then we always have some business objectives. So those are the objectives that we know that are going to help our bottom line, either financially or some internally. So we know that when we have a list of museums in Michigan, that we're going to be able to communicate with them better. And we will do a membership drive that and be more successful, but we didn't put that in there, but that's another secret objective. I should have those too. Okay, here's one of my favorite things, everybody. It's called an excluded objective, okay? So these are the things that I put in there that we're not going to do. So in this project, every time we talked about getting a list of museums, we've talked about this high-level analysis. And we can't do that. We don't have the time or the bodies for that. So I put it on paper in writing that says we are not doing an in-depth study of the museum community. And I'm not getting every single board meeting, or we just did more strategic planning again. People keep coming back to all the data we're going to have on this thing. And so Claire and I just say, no, we're just going to have a list. We'll just have a list of names. But because it's in writing here, everyone's agreed on it, that if a board member gets to be in their bonnet that we have to have this in-depth study, I have a piece of paper that I can say, no, that's not what we're doing right now. See, it's an exclusive objective. We don't do that. We do Museums Advocacy Day every year, and a couple of years our exclusive objective was social media, because I can't do it. Like it's too hard for me. I can't tweet and at the same time. I think too much about what I'm saying. And so I just said to them, I'll go, but I'm not going to be able to do the social media for it. And that way, but nobody could come back to me later and say, why don't you do social media? Because I could say, well, I already told you I'm not doing social. Now we do it now because we figured out how to make that work. But it's a nice little thing for me to be able to document and tell them ahead of time, this is not going to happen. Don't expect this to happen. Okay, then we do a little risk assessment. So we like to know going into the project, like, how scary is this, right? So some projects like this one, it's not really that big of a risk. So the biggest concern was that it's going to be a time suck for us, which it has been, or that it would take too long, which it has, or that we didn't get enough people, which we didn't. So, we had some risks here, but we're not going to shut down as an organization if this fails. So it's just a moderate risk. The conference is high risk for us every year. It's a lot of money, really all the eggs are in that basket. So when we talk about when I do a conference project, the risk assessment section is the longest section of this page, because we think through, like our conference this year, Dearborn, it's more expensive, so we have to raise more money, and what will we do if we don't? And so we just kind of address all the things that we're scared of in the risk assessment. That just personally helps me to think through those things. I don't like to have a question about it. I mean, I just would rather think about it and know what the risk is up front and have some plan B's and C's ready, rather than have it crop up. I mean, because there's always things that crop up anyway. Okay, and then we articulate the requirements. This is kind of where I get the approval to be able to do it the way that I want to do it. So for us, we knew this project would take a lot of staff time, that we knew we'd need volunteers because we didn't have a lot of staff. And then we use the internet because we do use the Google. Basecamp is our software program that we use to keep everybody organized. And that's another, I could evangelize about Basecamp. That's another webinar, but it's awesome. Right now we use Excel as our spreadsheet, and then we use SurveyMonkey because that's where we're capturing all the data. We're not even using it publicly, but that's how we're using it internally. And then we have the project deliverable, like literally what is the thing that's going to come out of this, and that's on there. Now, so then we have constraints. So these are the, I had my excluded objectives. This is kind of where the board gets to say to me, this is where your limits are, right? So one constraint was that it had to be done by last year. That did not happen, but there was a process for that, and I'll talk about that in a second. There was no budget. We had no money to spend on it. Staff time was as available, so that it wasn't going to be, I couldn't put the conference on hold for this. And then really the speed was going to be decided by the people that were doing the project. Oh, sorry about that. Sorry, I'm trying to turn that volume off. I apologize. I have too many phones. And then just a note that we wanted to remember that seasonal museums, we need to be doing this in the summer when seasonal museums were open. And then we had the key milestones for when all this was going to happen. I will tell you the only milestone that we met for this one was March 10th. But that's also the beauty of this. We approved this on March 10th. And then probably about April 10th, my proxy checked in with me, and we had not done a final survey, and we had not quite recruited volunteers. And so it was at that time that I said to her, like, okay, the timing of this really has been bad because I'm gearing up to conference planning, and so I'm going to have to push the dates back. So there's a process. If we're going to, once this is approved, there's a process for changing it. So the process is, if I need to do something different than what was approved, I go to the proxy and I say, I need more time or more money, or if something pops up that's a problem, I go to them and say, here's a problem. And first I go to the proxy, and they then either tell me, they feel like they can speak for the board to tell me how to respond, or if it's something that they're not really sure about, then they take that to the executive committee. And they bring the concern to the executive committee and often will suggest options. And then the executive committee will say, okay, do that. Or they'll say, we need to bring it to the full board. And then it goes to the full board. So for this project, it's moderate risk. It's not life-threatening or anything. So really, it's been the proxy and I that have talked. So she knows it was behind schedule from the get-go. We really struggled getting volunteers and me finding the time. And so about every 3 months, she'll check in with me to see what's going. Now we finally gotten it on the fast track, and it's moving quickly, and all is good. And so I haven't really heard from her. She's on Basecamp and can lurk, so she knows what's going on, but she doesn't. She hasn't really had to become involved. She gets the trophy for best proxy though, because she gets engaged when she feels like she needs to, but doesn't do it very often. I have lots of reporting I do every month. And so all the board members know where all the projects are, but she in particular sticks in. So. Okay, now I have to go back to my PowerPoint slide. I'm not really sure how to do that. So if I screw up, it'll just be a second. Oh, I don't want to leave the webinar. Oh, look, there we go. All right, so we're back. So that's an example of a project, how we define it and how we put it together. Let's see, and so that's the define stage. So that, let me just go back to that previous slide and see. So you can see all these things are here that we're going to do. And we all agree on this ahead of time. And if it takes, if it takes a long time, that's okay. Sometimes there's points where I can tell that there's just one point of discussion on the board and they don't agree. And so then I have to decide, well, do we want to move forward even though they don't agree, or do we want to just figure out how to find a way for them to talk it out a little bit more? So this is the best part of, well, it's not the best, but one of the best parts is we spend so much time on the defining part of it. And the board is just a lot of discussions and a lot of conversations that we kind of get everything out in the air that we can talk about it. And then the next stage is the planning stage. And to me, that's usually pretty quick. I've already mentally in my head kind of had a plan. As they're discussing things, I can see the way the wind is blowing. So this is usually one of the shortest stages, but we figure out the schedule, we figure out the resources, the detailed budget. Usually in the plan or in the defining stage, there's a dollar figure. So like the conference will say you cannot spend more than this much money, or this is how much net you have to get. So we'll often have dollar figures in that initial part of it, but then this part is where I get to figure out the smaller details part of it. So if we could only spend $60,000 on a conference, where's all that going to get spent is where. Then we decide who's, like for roles, the conference, I have 7 different planning teams. And so then I decide who are the team leads for that. What are the communications? And then, we talk about ahead of time, like, what are we going to do if we have to change the plan? So we just kind of review with the proxy how that works. And then the next stage, which is the fun stage for me, is the execution stage. And you can see the board is not very involved, but me and the teams are always involved. So we have lots of progress. One of the things that I do a lot at this stage, though, is I try and communicate with the board a lot and try and get a lot of feedback from the project and the teams and the board. We're reallocating resources if we need to. And then again, to resolve the issues, it goes, if I see a problem, I tell the proxy either acts on it or takes it to the executive committee. They either act on it or take it to the full board, and then it's decided. And then the last stage, which is my favorite, is evaluation. It's not my favorite, but I really think it's important. And so I really like that it's an actual concrete stage. That's the project is completed. We evaluate the project. So there's a board meeting that's set aside to evaluate the project. I try to get a lot of data first. So I'll do, like for the conference, I do a participant survey, I do a presenter survey, I do a planning team survey, and then I'll do a board survey. So I tell them the objectives and ask them what they think about that. So try to get a lot of data, and then we'll have a sit down and evaluate it. If it's something complicated like the conference that everybody cares about, I'll use lots of different processes to make sure that we air all their concerns and cheer the successes. And then I write all those down. And for every project has a project report. So I get really stuck on that sometimes because it takes me so long to write it. But so I am a little behind on the reporting, but I try to document all these things, and then we celebrate. And I still figured out how to do that. We have it. Those are the stages of project management. It's a beautiful thing. And you can see where, you do different things at different times, things that the board does at different times. So I just want to tell you my top 10 things about project management. So one is context. Number 10 is, I'm going to be Dave Letterman. Number 10 is context. I really like that we document the context of the project so that everybody remembers why we're doing it and what other things that have been leading up to it. And like I'll say, MMA has done a conference ever since 1952 or whatever year. So everybody really understands how big is this or how little is this. Number 9, excluded objectives. I think I said that enough when I was talking about them. I love it as a tool to be able to say to the board, no, we're not doing that, stop. We're not anyway. The next thing, we build the thinking in at the beginning. I had a conference, it was 90% planned. We went to board meeting and I had to go back to about 20% planned after board meeting. And now they can't do that to me. They can't do that to me. That doesn't happen because we think at the beginning, people wait at the beginning. There's a problem in the middle. There's a process. I don't just get it forced on me without any warning. I like that we have the evaluation built in at the end. That I think sometimes kids like we do something and move on to the next thing. I love that it's for the next time. So the museum census, that probably, so we'll finish the census, we'll put it away, we'll put it to bed, and then we'll want to do the next phase. We'll go back to the report from the first phase, and we'll have our ideas will all be documented, and we'll wrote them down. It's easy to pull in new people to the project because we have this document for them that what we're doing and why we're doing it. It's resulted in fewer teachers. We don't stop and read historical markers very often because we have already decided before we went that we're not going to do that. It gives staff accountability. So I have a wonderful board and they have a lot of confidence, so I pretty much can do whatever I want, but that's not really good. And it's not good for thinking. So it makes me accountable. And if I'm going on the project, go, hey, that's not really what we agreed on. So it's easy for them to kind of pull me back, and then I can remind myself too, like, oh, right, I'm not supposed to do this. So get it together, Lisa. But accountability so that they can't, or I find, I don't know about you guys, board members that are really vocal and they just want it to happen their way. And this gives them accountability to the rest of the board as well. So the quiet board members who aren't going to put up a fuss because they've approved this, then their views are defended in the document. And then the final thing I love about it is clear expectations for everybody. We all know where we're going. And what is the result of all this beautiful project management? It's happy road trips, right? It's in the car, everyone's smiling, just go on the road trip, and we're all happy. Okay, maybe that's not totally true, but we're much happier than we were before. In the PowerPoint, which you can download, I have some links here. So I have a link to the ASLH web. I don't know if it's current to the current project management workshop. They have an online one right now on the calendar, which I wouldn't recommend that. If you want to do it, I'd do the in-person one. But also there's a organization called the Project Management Institute, which is sort of the certifier. And they have courses, and if you just go search on YouTube of project management, there are videos, and some of them are long and very boring, but some of them are short and help articulate different parts of it. And then I have my contact information because the favorite thing to do is and have greatest work with nonprofit boards using project management. So that's all in the PowerPoint that you can download the handout. That is what I have to tell you. Ruth Ann.
Well, bravo, I should say. Thank you very much. I'm going to turn your picture back on so people can ask you questions. There's your little picture, because mine is very big. And all of our attendees, they pointed out to me that they don't have the chat function. They have only the question function. So while y'all think of your questions, you're going to need to type it into the question function. And while you're doing that, I'm going to tell you who is here, because everyone did contribute that. I still have to recognize Molly Conley because she was the very first. She is from Alaska. She's president of Museum Alaska. Also from Alaska, we have Della Hall, Brooke Mundy from Tennessee, Cynthia Sweet from Iowa, Elizabeth, is it Bazan or Bazan? I'm not sure. Elizabeth, we're glad to have you. And she is from Illinois. Jonna McEntee from Ohio, Linda Indersby from Missouri, and we had Jessica Monahan from California, but she had to get off just a few minutes ago. She said she had another meeting. We have Janice Klein from Arizona. And did I miss anybody? I tried to write them down and keep track. And of course, Lisa and myself, and the person that you cannot see, whose name is Jennifer Coleman from the Texas Association, who helps us do this. clearly we are just learning how to work it, and we will get better over time, but I am grateful for TAM for letting us use the webinar platform and use Jennifer while we're doing this. So I am going to go to the question section and see what you all are saying. Someone did ask about a recording, and you know, this is recorded. Sorry, Lisa, for better or worse, this is recorded. We just have to figure out how to get it to play from the Cosmo website. So be patient and we'll do that. Oh, Lisa, someone said, nice job, Lisa. Really, it was a nice job. I would love to hear some more stories about how you talked the board into doing this. I can see how it would be a really useful tool to say, oh, no, that's excluded. This is not part of the project. But, you know, that whole detour taking thing is one of the huge problems that we all have with our board. And I think that's pretty cool that you can manage it in that way. Let's see. Here we go. From Della. Thank you, Della. Let me see. It's teeny weeny. How did you talk the board into doing this? My question exactly. How did you talk the board into doing this, Lisa?
Yeah, so it's a small miracle, really. I actually had a board president that we did not get along at all. It was awful. I almost quit. And I was just at the end of my rope. And, I said, you know, I just want to try this. Like I said, I just want to try this in a really way to try to apply it to the conference. And, you know, it's not going to make me mad if it doesn't work. I mean, it's fine. Like I know how to plan a maybe I started with something that everybody knew I could do already. Because I had been the vice president for programs and had really planned 2 conferences already. So I started with something that they already felt confident that I could do. And then I applied the process. It took a long time. And I really let them see it as opposed to just having them trust me on it. And then, yeah, I just took a long time to do it. And I explained it a lot. And I think that was it. I don't know. I mean, it was such a horrible, we were in such a bad place this started. Maybe everybody was just so frustrated that they just were like, can we just do anything better than this because we're flailing? So maybe they can be in total and utter crisis, and then you can introduce something completely different. But I think that just introducing one project, that's what my suggestion always is for people, to pick a project that is relatively low risk and introduce the process to it. And then everyone's like, yeah. And then you can kind of up the ante as you go along.
Okay. Next question. Can you give some specific examples of projects you've used this with successfully?
We do everything with this. So we literally, there is a chart of, yes, I'll show it to you in my little court. I can't do a view. So these are all, this is all list of projects. So we do every conference this way. We do every appeal this way. We're doing the census. Museums Advocacy Day each year has its own project that we start over from the beginning. Each annual year of workshops, an annual year of meets, which are our networking events. So everything that we do is its own project.
Okay, here's a question. Does Lisa find she gets more or better board participation in both decision making and implementation with this process? You know, there are boards who are willing to make decisions, but when it comes to implementation, it gets dicey.
Yeah, I feel like I've just corralled the board participation in a more helpful way. So the board members that, you know, I had board members that would sort of sidetrack things in the middle of the road. And that they just did that because they were highly engaged and they needed a time and a place. And I just gave them a better time and a place for me rather than them. I do think it helps onboard new board members a little bit because it shows them a process. so they can kind of engage faster, because, you know, new board members have to watch the landscape for a little while. But I will admit that they're still not as engaged as I would like them to be. I think that they just rely on me a lot for some of these things, and we've created the process for them to weigh in. But sometimes I get done with the defining stage and I'm just like, boy, like, I can't believe that you didn't want to discuss some of these things more. Like, this is really big, and you're just saying, okay, you know. So it's not, I mean, it's magic, but it's not a total miracle.
Here's another one, and I apologize for firing them at you. I just realized we're going to be short on time. Is the proxy the same thing as a committee chair, or does it take the responsibility off the committee chair?
So there aren't committee chairs. So we don't have board, so the board committees don't exist. So it's whoever kind of stands up and says, I'll do this. And their role is advisory to the project. So to me, a committee chair has more hands-on involvement in how things happen. And the proxy is really just advisory. During the planning, and especially during the implementation stage, they are not hands-on at all. And if I have board members that are on a project team, they're not the proxy. Okay.
You know, I should have asked you this at the beginning. How large is your board? How many people are we talking about?
Well, the bylaws say 10 to 15. We have 10 right now, but we're trying to get back up to 15 because 10 is really not very many.
All right, let's see if there's somebody else came in that I don't. Linda, can we get copies of the chart and some of the things you use to track and report?
Yeah, I can send that. That's funny.
Yes. Molly, let's see. Do you do the initial planning via the whole board, or do you keep the committees for this aspect? Well, you just addressed that they're not really committees. I suppose if it's only 10 people, you do this with the entire board?
So what I'll do is I'll say, I'm just trying to think about, so for the census, I said, I want to do a project where we count all the museums in Michigan, and I put it on the board agenda and the full board discussed it. So every meeting we discuss it, and I'd say, what do you want it to look like? You know what a project is going to look like, you know, what are some of these things? And so it was just a loosey-goosey thing. And then from those early discussions, I can determine who a good proxy would be. And then I'll say to the board president, hey, Joe would be a good proxy because they obviously care about this. I will confess that each conference has one proxy, but we're planning multiple conferences at once. So I do have a small board working team for conferences, but really there aren't committees board committees don't work on projects. Just
okay.
Either the full board or the proxy.
And then related to that, how often does the whole board meet with this structure in place?
We have every other month is board meetings. January is a conference call, so it's not that great of a meeting. And then one meeting's at the conference, so that's also not that great of a meeting. So we have 4 good meetings a year where we do a lot of this work.
All right, anybody else? Well, it is 2:59, and I guess you guys would like to go back to work. I'm sorry you don't have microphones, or else Lisa could hear us all applauding. And I really appreciate her willingness to share her expertise. And I appreciate the rest of you for being really patient with us learning how to do this. It's really nice to be able to interact, at least in this way, and to ask each other questions and to see at least a couple of faces at a time. Let's see if there are any last minute. No, everyone is saying thank you. Thank you, thank you, thank you, Lisa. You did a great job. So wow. With that, I'm going to sign us out. And remember to download the handout because it does have her contact information on it, and you can get to her that way. Our next webinar is in August, and it's on digital disasters. I know none of you have had those. So thank you for joining us. We'll talk to you soon. Bye.
Everybody.